All right, in our last chapter, and hopefully my last recording, the last two recordings, my dog in the background destroyed, but he seems to be content with his position right now. Let's see what happens in the next 10 minutes. In the last chapter, what we want to look at is we want to take a closer look at the relationship between one specific attitude, self-esteem, how I evaluate myself, and different types of behavior. And the self-esteem movement, title here of this chapter, kind of proclaims that anything that ails our society, any problem in your life, in my life, in anyone's life, can basically be traced back to a low self-esteem. And what we have to do is we have to increase the attitude people have towards themselves. If they have a more positive, then they will not do drugs, they will not do any type crime, they will have better achievement, etc., etc. Anything will be cured by increasing self-esteem. And this is an idea that pervaded for a while psychology and then positive psychology in other areas, but it's still very prominent wherever we are, right? This idea out there is like, oh, you have to believe, you have to think about positive, you have to believe in yourself, you're amazing in every way. Whether you studied last night or not, whether you watch any of Andreas' lectures or not, whether I upload my recordings on time or not, we are all amazing, right? And I think obviously there's philosophically something true to that, right? Whereas like the worth of a person does not depend on their actions, right? I deeply believe that a person who's a drug addict has as much value as a person as I have, right? So I don't think that there's that we philosophically opposed to that idea. But should I, as a person, feel really good about myself, and then once I feel good about myself, even if I didn't do very well in the last week, month, years, and so forth. And then once I feel good about myself, will things go better, right? It's almost like this is the precondition for all the amazing things in my life. If I only start to believe in myself and start feel better about thinking about myself. This is kind of like just a reminder, self-esteem, this evaluation of myself as a person, how like I have a lot of things that I should be proud of. I'm a worthy person. When I compare myself to others, I can see that I'm a good person with many good qualities, etc. We talked about this when we talked about measurements. And then there's like in California, then I thought like, oh, if we kind of look around, if we look at people who are like teen pregnancy, right? It's like obviously there are these girls that lack self-esteem and hence they fall in love with these stupid boys and then they become pregnant. Or people who do crime, right? They're unhappy with themselves and hence they lash out and become aggressive towards others. Or drug abuse, right? I feel unhappy about myself, hence I need to take drugs. Anything, it's all caused by low self-esteem. So the California gave the self-esteem task force money and said like, okay, look into that and try to figure out how we can increase the self-esteem of our citizens here in beautiful California and thereby basically lift us up to a whole other level of prosperity. And this is what they started to do. This is basically kind of the most visible outgrowth of the self-esteem movement, right? And so I said that before, and just as a quick reminder, the idea would be basically, if I look at all these wonderful, successful people, if I ask them about their self-esteem, do you think you're a worthy person? Are you happy with what you're doing in your life? Do you have confidence you can do the things you're doing? Then yes, the successful scientist, the uber successful TikTok star, a successful entrepreneur, all of them will have a very strong and high level of self-esteem, right? They will have a good opinion about themselves. So this could be an undefensive reflection of their actual achievements and qualities in their life, right? So this is like, and now this idea is, since all of them have high self-esteem, and then I look at the people who are doing poorly, well, they seem to have low self-esteem, hence self-esteem seems to be the thing we need to change. So there's this kind of cause or consequence, right? You can think about, the TikTok star, He started with his first TikToks. They got more views, so his confidence grew, his self-esteem grew, and then it got more views and so forth, and it goes back and forth. And if you ask him today, then basically because of his success, he feels good about himself. It's not that this, the self-esteem caused the success, right? But you can also say that maybe he had the confidence. He always believed in himself, unwavering belief in himself. He had the confidence to do it. And that is basically the self-esteem caused him to become so successful. So, cause or consequence of success. What is it? Here, the self-esteem movement very much believed that it's a cause, right? Diminished self-esteem stands as a powerful independent variable. In other words, a cause in the genesis of major social problems. We all know this to be true. The real problem we must address is how we can determine that it is scientifically true, right? I love you a little bit, but I mean, this is actually like if you go to talks on mindfulness or other things, right? You can now, with like in clinical psychology, there's like every 10 years there's a new wave. Now it's all about psychedelics, right? People will say the same things. They were just like, we know that psychedelics work. We know that mindfulness works. We know that meditation works. We know that high self-esteem works. Now we just have to prove it to be scientifically true. Turns out it's a little bit harder in each of these cases than you might think. So we had this kind of just a quick reminder, what does it measure? But it's like basically, is it like an undefensive reflection, high self-esteem of one's achievements, or is there this other thing, right? These what we had in the earlier chapter, these defensive mechanisms that have kind of like high unstable self-esteem that is also somewhat based in narcissistic and grandiose ideas about themselves, right? I had like Hard Rock Nick or whatever his name was, right? The kind of like fake flexing people that have very high self-esteem but seem obviously not to do very well in their life and seem to be a little bit narcissistic. So I had this picture of these two twins, right? There seems to be the temporally stable, undefensive high self-esteem, which might be a reflection of actual achievement, and there might be this more defensive, unstable, narcissistic high self-esteem, which seems to be more a product of self-enhancement tendencies than actual reality. So if we kind of look at that, the first kind of blow in some ways is this kind of what we talked in our second lecture when we talked about the self, that most people have a really positive view of themselves, right? I don't know how you feel about yourself, but if you ask students, and this is especially true for your generation compared to my generation was truer than the generation of my parents and so forth, then what you can see is that most people are really happy with themselves. They're just like, yeah, I'm pretty awesome. So here you see Jane Twenji and Keith Campbell. They have this book, she had the Generation Me book beforehand, John Twenji, but now they have the narcissism epidemic. And I think like, oh, look, you guys, these old boomers, they think that you guys are just completely narcissistic, and hence you have all these grandiose ideas about yourself. And this is actually a cause for concern and not, as the self-esteem movement would suggest, the cause for celebration. But there is kind of like, if you think about it from a point of view of trying to show whether self-esteem is important or not, it's kind of weird that if this is like basically the foundation of all our problems and ailments, that people have low self-esteem, then we should at least find a few more people who actually have low self-esteem. It's relatively rare to find them. There are, and there are some cases where this is kind of unhealthy, but it seems like overall we're kind of like, yep, it's always 80 to 90%, which is like, yep, thumbs up for myself. I'm pretty awesome. The other problem is with a lot of these research on self-esteem is often the outcome measures are self-reported, right? Now think about somebody like the most obnoxious kind of narcissist, right? And think about them, what they would say, like, are you intelligent? Oh yes. Are you good looking? Hoo-hoo. You bet. And then it's like, I don't know. Are you socially, like, are you popular? Are you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if I ask a narcissist, then they will say, yes, I'm academically awesome, I'm intelligent, I'm attractive, and yes, of course, I have high self-esteem. So we have to kind of look for a little bit more objective measures that we are not kind of mixing one with the other, right? So here's like one kind of very basic question, right? One of this is, do attractive people have higher self-esteem, right? And some of these correlations that they have, which is like insane between attractiveness and higher self-esteem, which I think is basically the same, which is also kind of weird because it would suggest that basically all my self-esteem and all your self-esteem is based on whether think we're attractive or not. But what you can see is basically here, just like the correlation between self-esteem and self-rated attractiveness is 0.85. This is insane, right? This is basically the same thing. I think I'm attractive, I have high self-esteem. But if I let others rate it, this 0.85, right, this almost perfect correlation disappears completely. So it's not that people with high self-esteem are more attractive, they just think they're more attractive. You can find the same patterns for intelligence. And so you would say like, oh, are you intelligent? Yes, I'm intelligent. Yes, I have high self-esteem. And then they give me an IQ test and I was like, oh, actually, I'm not that intelligent. Whoopsie daisy. It was just overestimation of my intelligence. And that's the same kind of self-enhancement drive that also drives my high self-esteem, right? So in terms of intelligence and attractiveness, high self-esteem doesn't really seem to kind of impact that. Let's talk about academic performance, I think, as the last one before we close it, because I think before we look a little bit at interventions, but it's like basically, okay, academic performance. Is it that low self-esteem might be holding you back, right? So there are very weak correlations between self-esteem and academic performance. There's a very, it seems to be among many other factors, one positive factor that it might help people to have better academic performance. But they might be, for instance, caused by underlying third factors. It might not be actually that the self-esteem is driving it, but for instance, socioeconomic status. How can you explain that? You're just like, okay, if I would have grown up rich, right, then this might have helped me with my academic performance, right? It might, for instance, give me more access to tutors, better materials, more blah, 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 better schools, right? So hence, my socioeconomic status helps me to increase my academic performance. It also makes me feel better than others. Like, I was like, oh, look at these poor children, right? In comparison, I feel good about myself. I feel good about the things I have. So socioeconomic status might cause higher self-esteem and might also cause better academic performance. But the self-esteem, the high self-esteem in itself might not be related to academic performance. So it's a very disappointing kind of correlations you find, and especially if you measure some control variables, okay? Most people, I think, feel that self-esteem is the consequence and not the cause of grades. So if you get good grades, then your self-esteem goes up. Some even think, okay, the reason why you're striving for good grades is to feel good about yourself. And if I would improve your self-esteem, then actually there might be a chance that this backfires, because now I feel like I don't have to achieve good grades to feel good about myself. Hence, I decouple that. Hence, there's no need for me to study, right? There are, and this is kind of the finding that several studies find. So this is here. Sorry, I can't get my pen activated, or I'm too scared to do it because I'm almost done and I don't want to start this recording again. But what you can see here is a study, I think, by Roy Baumeister and Forsett and others. And so basically they have this kind of like, they have a first test, then they have an intervention, and they have another test. What they want to do is they want to help low achieving students, okay? DNF, so students who did very poorly in the first assessment, in this first test. You can see in a control condition, they do the first test, and then they don't get any treatment in a second test, and they're basically staying on their DNF scores, okay? But then you have students, and this is like, don't worry about this. This is like a internal locus of control condition, you can see that trying to convince students that they should have an internal locus of control is not really successful. Think about what we talked about last week. Attributions are also often like a consequence, not a cause, for the success we have. So changing them. But then you see here, just like massive drop, right? Just like basically these students, they're doing not well, and now they get the self-esteem, the high self-esteem intervention. Basically, it tells them, look, you didn't do well, but successful students still remain confident. It's like independent of their marks, independent of their grades, they remain that they're great students, that are great people, and you should just remain really confident, independent of your marks, right? And so the idea here is why this might have backfired is basically that it kind of takes the motor out of the car, right? It kind of says like, oh, if I strive to get good grades to get good self-esteem, and now you decouple that, then the self-esteem interventions backfire. There are other examples where actually increasing self-esteem makes people more aggressive because they have this kind of fragile self-esteem, and now the moment it is threatened, they become really aggressive. So overall, and this is when we stop doing them, self-esteem is not a good predictor, or this is not a good thing to aim for when you want to help somebody. Aim at the underlying causes of the self-esteem and not at the outcome. All right? And with that, I'll end today's session.